Caroline Wood stood in her kitchen, hands trembling slightly as she opened the manila envelope that would change everything. At 65, with her silver-streaked chestnut hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses perched on her nose, she looked like any other retired accountant enjoying her golden years. But the document she now held told a different story, one of betrayal, deception, and cold, calculated revenge. If you enjoy stories of justice served ice-cold, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more gripping tales of revenge and vindication. The receipt fluttered from Richard's coat pocket as I hung it in our shared closet, a seemingly insignificant slip of paper that would unravel 40 years of marriage. I almost ignored it, almost tucked it back where it belonged. For 4 decades, I'd respected my husband's privacy, trusted his integrity. But something, intuition perhaps, or simply fate, made me unfold that small square of paper. Louis Vuitton. $4,700. Purchased yesterday. I stared at it, uncomprehending at first. Richard had never bought me anything from Louis Vuitton. In fact, his stance on overpriced designer nonsense was well established. For our anniversary last month, he'd given me a practical kitchen mixer, explaining that with inflation and our retirement planning, extravagances were unwise. Yet somehow, he'd found nearly $5,000 for a designer bag. I replaced the receipt exactly as I'd found it and went through the motions of preparing dinner. As the chicken roasted, my mind raced, connecting dots I'd previously ignored. For years, no, decades, Richard had insisted on managing our finances. Being an investment banker while I worked as a corporate accountant, it had seemed reasonable. His monthly financial ritual was as consistent as the sunrise. I need $7,000 for our shared expenses, Caroline. I never questioned it. I earned well, he earned better, and we lived comfortably. The amount seemed plausible for mortgage, utilities, insurance, and miscellaneous expenses. But now, sitting at our kitchen island, I began to wonder where that money actually went. When Richard came home, I served dinner with a smile, the perfect picture of a devoted wife. As he detailed his day at the investment firm, I studied him with new eyes. The silver at his temples that I once found distinguished now seemed like the mark of a cunning predator. His manicured hands that I used to admire now looked like tools of deception. I might need to meet with some clients Saturday, he mentioned casually between bites of roast chicken. This weekend? But we were supposed to visit Sarah. Our daughter lived just an hour away with her husband and our grandchildren. Can't be helped. Henderson account. Very important. He didn't even look up from his plate. The lie slid so easily from his lips that I wondered how many thousands had preceded it. After dinner, I checked our shared calendar where I dutifully noted all appointments. No Henderson meeting. But there was a note in his separate work calendar that he'd accidentally synced to our home system. 12 p.m., brunch at Riverside. The next day, I canceled my lunch with my friend Patricia, inventing a migraine. Instead, I drove to the Riverside Hotel, parked where my sedan wouldn't be noticed, and waited. At 12:15, Richard arrived, not in his usual practical Audi, but in a sleek Jaguar I'd never seen before. He valeted the car and straightened his tie, a new one I noted, before entering the hotel. 15 minutes later, a woman arrived in a taxi. She couldn't have been more than 35, nearly 3 decades my junior. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in the kind of effortless waves that require considerable effort. And on her arm dangled a brand new Louis Vuitton bag. Something inside me broke and reconstituted in that moment. Not into something fragile, but into something hardened and resolute. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to see more. Instead, I drove to our bank and requested our complete financial records for the past year. Is Mr. Woods aware of this request? The manager asked, knowing we typically came in together. This is a surprise for our anniversary. I lied, matching Richard's ease with deception. I'm putting together a financial retrospective of our years together. That evening, I began reviewing our statements, and what I found sent ice through my veins. The $7,000 monthly withdrawal was there, consistent as clockwork. But our actual household expenses, which I tracked meticulously in my personal budgeting software, never exceeded $3,200. Where had the other $3,800 gone? Every month. For years. I did the calculation that would haunt me for weeks to come. $3,800 multiplied by 12 months, multiplied by the 38 years of our marriage since he'd taken over the finances. $1,732,800. Nearly $2 million vanished from my life. $2 million of my hard work, my salary, my trust. That night, as Richard slept soundly beside me, I made a decision. I would not confront him. I would not rage or weep or demand explanations. No, I would do what I had been trained to do over decades as an accountant. I would follow the money. And when I had every fact, every figure, every damning piece of evidence, then, and only then, would I act. His soft snores filled our bedroom as I stared at the ceiling, my mind calculating compound interest on stolen dreams. Finding a forensic accountant without alerting Richard required discretion. My longtime friend Patricia, the same one I'd canceled lunch with, had gone through a difficult divorce 5 years earlier. "Who handled your financial investigation?" I asked her over coffee at a cafe deliberately chosen for its distance from our usual haunts. Patricia studied me, concern etching lines around her eyes. "Caroline, is everything all right?" "Just being prudent," I replied, stirring my latte with measured precision. At our age, one should understand one's complete financial picture. She didn't believe me. Friends rarely do when you lie, but she respected my privacy enough to simply slide me a business card. Maxwell Turner. Discreet, thorough, and ruthless when necessary. He found offshore accounts my ex-husband's own banker didn't know existed. I met Mr. Turner the following day in his downtown office. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and fingers that moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Woods, everything you share with me is confidential," he assured me after I'd explained my suspicions. "Even the fact that we're meeting." "I need to know everything," I said. "Where the money went, what he purchased, who else might be involved. I need documentation that would stand up in court." "This level of investigation takes time," he warned. "And it's not inexpensive." I smiled thinly. "I've been a certified accountant for 43 years, Mr. Turner. I understand billable hours. And I have my own funds that Richard knows nothing about." What I didn't mention was that these funds came from an inheritance from my mother that I'd kept separate, intuiting even then that financial independence might someday be crucial. It wasn't a fortune. $175,000 doesn't go as far as it once did. But it would be enough to pay for the truth. Turner nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "We'll need access to all financial records. Bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts. The more you can provide, the less we'll have to obtain through other means." "Other means?" "Legal ones," he clarified. "But not all investigations require the subject's knowledge or cooperation." Over the next 3 weeks, I became a spy in my own home. I photographed documents from Richard's home office while he showered. I noted down account numbers from statements he carelessly left visible. I created a new email address, something I'd never needed before, to communicate with Turner securely. The first revelations came faster than I expected. Turner discovered a separate checking account at a bank across town. The monthly deposits matched exactly the excess $3,800 that disappeared from our household budget. "This is just the surface," Turner explained during our third meeting. "This account is a clearinghouse. Money doesn't stay here long." He showed me transfer records. Funds moved from this account to various investment vehicles, property management companies, and other banks, some with addresses in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. How long? I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. How long has this been happening? Turner pulled up a timeline on his screen. The earliest records we've located date back 19 years. But older records might exist in paper form only. 19 years. More than $500,000 diverted, at minimum. And that was just what we knew so far. There's something else, Turner said, hesitation in his voice for the first time. Some of these transfers correspond with payments to a company called Luxury Living Leases. We investigated. It's a high-end property rental firm. He slid a folder across his desk. Inside were photographs of a waterfront condo in a part of the city I rarely visited. The furnishings were modern, minimalist, nothing like our traditional colonial home in the suburbs. One photo showed a terrace with a stunning view of the river and city skyline. Property records show it's owned by an LLC, Turner continued. The LLC traces back to a shell corporation, which ultimately connects to your husband. He has another home, I said, the words tasting bitter. Mrs. Woods, in my experience, men don't maintain separate residences for themselves alone. I nodded, unsurprised yet still wounded. Find everything, Mr. Turner. Every account, every property, every person involved. As I left his office, my phone chimed with a text from Richard. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I texted back. No problem. Take care of yourself. The performance of a lifetime had begun, and I intended to deliver a finale Richard would never forget. Maxwell Turner's team worked with remarkable efficiency. By our 6th meeting, they had assembled a preliminary financial profile of Richard's hidden empire. There was no other word for it. What had begun as a suspicion of infidelity had morphed into the discovery of a parallel life carefully constructed over decades. Your husband maintains 3 properties beyond your primary residence, Turner explained, laying out photographs and property records. The riverside condo we identified earlier, a cabin in the mountains about 3 hours north, and a beachfront property in Florida. All purchased with our money, I said, the words flat. With the diverted funds, yes. Turner hesitated. Mrs. Woods, I should prepare you. The personal aspects of our investigation have uncovered complications. The complications had names. Jennifer, the blonde I'd seen at the Riverside Hotel, was only the most recent in a series of companions. Before her, there had been Alexis, a pharmaceutical sales representative 15 years my junior, who had occupied the Riverside condo for nearly 4 years. Before Alexis, a woman named Sophia, who had actually traveled with Richard on business trips to the Florida property. How many? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. We've confirmed 5 long-term arrangements over the past 19 years. There may have been others more casual in nature. 5 women had enjoyed the fruits of my labor, lived in homes purchased with funds that should have secured my retirement, worn jewelry and designer clothes bought with money stolen from our marriage. And they knew about me? Turner nodded grimly. Based on text messages and emails we've recovered, yes. You were discussed. Some messages contain rather unkind references. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, a cold fury crystallized within me. These women had knowingly participated in my deception, had laughed at the aging wife keeping the home fires burning while they enjoyed weekend getaways and expensive gifts. Show me the financial structure, I said, redirecting to what I could process without shattering. Where did the money go besides these properties and companionship? Turner's expression shifted to professional detachment as he brought up financial diagrams on his tablet. This is where it gets more serious from a legal perspective. We've identified multiple investment accounts, some domestic, others offshore. The money movement suggests deliberate concealment. Tax evasion, I translated. Potentially. And there's more. Turner swiped to another screen. Your husband's position at Meridian Investments appears to have been used to facilitate certain transactions that raise regulatory concerns. He's stealing from his clients too? Not exactly stealing. More like self-dealing. Directing client investments through channels that generated additional commissions routed to his private accounts. It's subtle, but it violates SEC regulations and fiduciary duty. I sat back, absorbing the magnitude of the deception. Richard wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a financial predator whose criminality extended beyond our marriage into his professional realm. Would this be enough to trigger an investigation by his firm? By the government? Turner's eyes met mine. With proper documentation and presentation to the right authorities? Absolutely. That evening, I prepared Richard's favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables, and a bottle of the Bordeaux he favored. As he savored each bite, complimenting my cooking, I studied him across our dining room table. You seem distracted, he observed, refilling his wine glass. Everything okay? Just thinking about retirement, I replied truthfully. Whether we're truly prepared. Richard chuckled, the sound grating against my nerves. Don't worry your head about that. I've got everything under control. Our finances are solid. You've always been so good with money, I agreed, raising my glass in a toast. To financial security. He clinked his glass against mine, completely unaware that I now knew about the $327,000 transfer he'd made last week to purchase municipal bonds sheltered from tax authorities in an account under his LLC's name. Actually, I continued, I was thinking maybe I should be more involved in our financial planning. After all, we're both getting older. A flicker of something annoyance? Concern crossed his face before his features settled back into benign condescension. That's thoughtful, but unnecessary. Finance is complicated these days. Best leave it to me. As you wish, I acquiesced, the perfect picture of a trusting wife. Later that night, I emailed Turner from my secret account. Proceed with Phase 2. Document everything. The forensic reconstruction of Richard's betrayal accelerated. Turner's team obtained bank surveillance footage showing Richard accessing safe deposit boxes I never knew existed. They documented meetings with the various women, photographed from discreet distances. They compiled records of wire transfers, property taxes paid through shell companies, and estimated tax liabilities evaded. Most damning were the professional improprieties. Richard had been directing clients' funds into investment vehicles where he held hidden interests, collecting undisclosed fees, and in some cases, manipulating information presented to both clients and his firm. This goes beyond SEC violations, Turner explained during one of our meetings. Some of these activities potentially violate anti-money laundering statutes, which means criminal charges are possible. Not just professional censure or civil penalties. I should have felt horrified at the prospect of my husband of 40 years facing criminal charges. Instead, I felt a grim satisfaction taking root. The man who slept beside me each night was not the man I thought I'd married. He was a stranger who had stolen nearly $2 million from me, betrayed me repeatedly, and broken laws entrusted to him as a financial professional. What would happen, I asked carefully, if his firm's compliance department received this information? And the IRS? And the SEC? Turner's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes held understanding. A perfect storm, Mrs. Woods. His professional reputation, financial standing, and personal freedom would all be simultaneously at risk. I see, I said, and for the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Then, that's exactly what we need to prepare for. As I drove home, hands steady on the wheel, I calculated the interest on betrayal and found the accumulated debt to be more than Richard could ever repay. The dossier grew thicker each week. Turner's team worked methodically, building a financial history that spanned decades and crossed jurisdictions. What had begun as an investigation into marital infidelity had expanded into a comprehensive examination of financial fraud, tax evasion, and professional misconduct. "We need to be precise and thorough," Turner cautioned during one of our meetings. "If we're going to present this to regulatory authorities, everything must be documented beyond question." I appreciated his caution. As an accountant, I understood the importance of meticulous documentation. Numbers don't lie, but they must be interpreted correctly to tell their full story. Parallel to Turner's investigation, I began consulting with Patricia's divorce attorney, Eleanor Simmons. Unlike Turner's modern downtown office, Simmons worked from a converted Victorian house with creaking floorboards and windows that had witnessed a century of human drama. "This level of financial concealment complicates things," Simmons explained, reviewing the preliminary findings. "But it also strengthens your position tremendously. Judges take a very dim view of hidden assets and systematic financial deception." "I want everything," I said simply. "Not just my fair share. Everything." Simmons raised an eyebrow. "That's not how equitable distribution typically works in this state." "There's nothing typical about this situation. He's been systematically stealing from me for decades. I want it all back with interest. With the evidence of financial misconduct you're gathering, we can certainly argue for a disproportionate distribution in your favor," she conceded. "But I need you to understand that the legal system may not deliver the complete retribution you're seeking." "The divorce is just one front in this war," I replied. "I intend to fight on several battlefields simultaneously." As spring turned to summer, my double life continued. To Richard, I remained the dutiful wife of 40 years, preparing meals, attending social functions, maintaining our home. But behind this carefully maintained facade, I was assembling the weapons of his destruction. Turner's team uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Switzerland. They documented property holdings through shell companies. They tracked the movement of funds that should have been declared on our joint tax returns, but mysteriously vanished before April 15th each year. "The tax issue alone is substantial," Turner explained, showing me a spreadsheet of estimated liabilities. "We're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands in unpaid taxes, penalties, and interest." "And his firm's clients?" "The ones whose investments he manipulated." "We've identified 17 high-net-worth clients whose portfolios show evidence of self-dealing and hidden fee structures. The total financial impact exceeds $4.3 million. I sat back, temporarily overwhelmed by the scale of Richard's deception. This wasn't just a husband stealing from his wife. This was a sophisticated financial predator who had spent decades constructing an elaborate fraud. Would his firm fire him if they knew? Immediately, Turner confirmed. Financial institutions survive on trust and reputation. They terminate him and report to regulatory authorities to protect themselves. My next meeting with Simmons focused on timing and strategy. The divorce filing could trigger financial discovery that might alert him to your investigation, she warned. If we want the regulatory complaints to hit simultaneously, we need precise coordination. What about my own liability? I asked. We filed joint tax returns all these years. We'll file for innocent spouse relief with the IRS. The evidence of his concealment from you is substantial, but you'll need to move quickly once everything is in motion. Separate your remaining finances immediately after filing. As the case built, I found myself changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The shock and grief of betrayal had calcified into something harder, more resolute. I began sleeping better, my appetite returned, and I even joined a twice-weekly yoga class, something Richard subtly discouraged for years as not appropriate for women our age. One evening, as we sat in our living room, Richard with his financial journal, me with my tablet secretly reviewing Turner's latest findings, he looked up suddenly. You seem different lately, he observed. More energetic. I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes.
Doi.
Perhaps I'm just finding my second wind. You've been going out more. That yoga class, lunches with Patricia. There it was, the faint note of suspicion, the slight narrowing of his eyes. After decades of my unquestioning compliance, my small steps toward independence had registered as anomalies. I'm trying to stay active, I replied mildly. The doctor says it's important at our age. He seemed to accept this, returning to his journal. But I noticed how his gaze followed me more carefully in the days that followed, how he asked more questions about my schedule, how he occasionally checked my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He suspects something, I told Turner during our next meeting. That's not unexpected. Men like your husband maintain control through awareness. Any change in pattern triggers their alarms. How much longer until we're ready? Turner consulted his notes. The financial documentation is nearly complete. The tax analysis will be finished next week. The evidence of professional misconduct is substantial and growing. And the women? His companions? We have documented connections to all 5. Financial transfers, communications, property usage. Everything they received that was funded by your joint assets. I nodded, satisfaction coursing through me. Then it's time to consult the specialists. The specialists were the final pieces in my chess game, a former IRS investigator who now consulted privately on tax cases, a securities attorney with SEC experience, and a forensic computer expert who could ensure all digital evidence was properly preserved and authenticated. Each reviewed the relevant portions of our findings, refining the presentation for maximum impact with their respective agencies. I've rarely seen a case this comprehensive, the former IRS investigator commented. You've done the government's job for them. They'll be very interested. The securities attorney was similarly impressed. The pattern of self-dealing is clear and documented. The SEC will definitely investigate, and his firm will have no choice but to terminate him once they see this. As summer waned, the dossier was complete. 3 bound volumes of financial records, sworn statements, photographic evidence, and expert analysis. 1 for the divorce court, 1 for the IRS and SEC, and 1 for Richard's firm. Are you certain you want to proceed with all of this simultaneously? Simmons asked during our final planning meeting. The impact will be catastrophic. That's precisely the point, I replied, my voice steady. He didn't just cheat on me. He stole my financial security, my dignity, my trust. He used me as a convenient cover for decades while building a parallel life with my money. There will be no warnings, no chances to hide assets or construct explanations. Just complete, overwhelming consequences. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange calm descend. For months, I'd maintained the performance of my life, the oblivious, trusting wife. Soon, the curtain would rise on the final act. Richard was waiting when I arrived, a glass of wine already poured for me. Where have you been? You didn't answer my texts. Book club ran late. I lied smoothly. We got into a heated discussion about the ending. You know how Patricia gets. He seemed to accept this, but I noticed how his eyes lingered on my face, searching for something. After 40 years, he sensed the change in me, even if he couldn't identify its nature. I love you, you know, he said suddenly, unexpectedly. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the photographs of Jennifer wearing the Louis Vuitton bag he'd bought her. I remembered the riverside condo purchased with money that should have been building our retirement. I remembered 19 years of systematic theft. I know, I replied, smiling as I raised my glass. To us. He clinked his glass against mine, unaware that the timer on his destruction had already begun its countdown. 3 weeks before what I'd come to think of as execution day, I began methodically separating my financial life from Richard's. The process required careful timing. Too soon, and he might notice. Too late, and I risked losing access once everything exploded. First came the safe deposit box at a bank where Richard had no accounts. Into it went my mother's jewelry, important documents, and a reserve of cash. Next, I opened a new individual checking account, directing my pension deposits there instead of our joint account. Keep the initial transfers small, Turner had advised. Nothing that would trigger alerts or seem unusual. I withdrew $9,500 from our joint savings, just under the $10,000 that would require reporting, and deposited it in my new account. When Richard didn't mention it, I made a similar withdrawal the following week. My preparations weren't solely financial. I quietly packed essentials and family mementos, storing them at Patricia's house under the guise of decluttering. I made appointments with our family doctor, dentist, and optometrist, ensuring my prescriptions were current before our health insurance situation changed. Throughout these preparations, I maintained the facade of normalcy. I prepared Richard's favorite meals, listened to his stories about work, and even accompanied him to his firm's summer barbecue, where I smiled and chatted with colleagues who had no idea their financial portfolios were being manipulated by the charming man at my side. "You seem distracted lately," Richard commented one evening as we prepared for bed. "Is everything all right?" "Just thinking about my sister's health issues," I lied, referencing a genuine concern that provided convenient cover. The latest tests weren't encouraging. He nodded sympathetically, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that once would have comforted me. Now, it took all my self-control not to shrug it away. "Don't worry too much," he advised. "You know how doctors exaggerate to protect themselves." The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard, the master of deception, cautioning against others' dishonesty. As the date approached, Richard's behavior subtly changed. He called more frequently during the day, asking about my whereabouts. He suggested we plan a vacation, just the two of us, for the fall. He even brought home flowers one evening, something he hadn't done in years. "He senses something," I told Turner during one of our final meetings. "His instincts are warning him." "Predators develop acute perception," Turner replied. "They have to avoid detection for so long. But unless he knows specifically what to look for, he can't possibly anticipate what's coming." The final piece fell into place when Turner's team documented a significant transfer of funds from one of Richard's hidden accounts to a new offshore entity. "He's moving money," Turner explained, creating another layer of distance. "It actually strengthens our case, shows continuing active concealment." "Can we track it?" "Already done. We've documented the transfer chain. It ultimately ends up in a Singapore account under yet another shell company name." The week before execution day, I met one last time with a team of specialists who would help deliver Richard's destruction. "The IRS notification is prepared," the tax specialist confirmed. "With the documentation you've provided, they'll almost certainly open a full investigation immediately." The securities attorney nodded agreement. Same with the SEC filing. "The evidence of client fund mismanagement is compelling and specific. They'll act quickly given the ongoing nature of the violations." Eleanor Simmons, my divorce attorney, reviewed the final petition. "We're requesting an emergency freeze on all known assets pending full financial discovery." With the evidence of active concealment, the judge is likely to grant it. Finally, Turner presented the packet prepared for Richard's firm. This goes directly to the head of compliance and the general counsel simultaneously. Given the regulatory implications, they'll have no choice but to suspend him immediately while they investigate. "And the timing?" I asked, though I'd reviewed the schedule repeatedly. "All notifications delivered within a 2-hour window," Turner confirmed. No chance for him to get ahead of any of it. The night before everything was set in motion, Richard and I had dinner at the upscale restaurant where we'd celebrated our anniversary for years. It had been my suggestion. One last meal before the deluge. He seemed pleased, even ordering champagne. To many more years, he toasted, his eyes holding mine. I smiled and sipped the expensive bubbles, wondering if he noticed that my toast was merely a silent gesture, no words of affirmation crossing my lips. I've been thinking, he said as we enjoyed our entrees, maybe we should revisit our estate planning. Make sure everything's properly arranged for the future. The irony nearly made me laugh aloud. On the eve of his financial annihilation, he was still playing the role of prudent financial steward. That sounds wise, I agreed. Tomorrow is uncertain for all of us. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb caressing my wedding ring. I don't tell you often enough how much I appreciate you, Caroline. Your stability, your trust. Not many marriages last 40 years these days. For a moment, just a moment, doubt crept in. For decades of shared history, the raising of our daughter, the accumulated weight of a lifetime together. Was I really prepared to destroy it all? Then I remembered the riverside condo where another woman slept in a bed he'd purchased with my money. I remembered the offshore accounts containing funds that should have secured my retirement. I remembered 19 years of calculated theft from the woman he claimed to love. No, I agreed, my voice steady. They don't. That night, as Richard slept beside me, I lay awake, reviewing mental checklists. My essential belongings were secured. My finances were disentangled as much as possible before legal proceedings. The notifications were prepared and would be delivered precisely as planned. In the darkness, I turned to study Richard's profile. Even in sleep, he maintained a slight smile, as if the world bent naturally to his desires. Perhaps it always had. Until now. Goodbye, I whispered, too softly to disturb his slumber. In the morning, I rose early and prepared breakfast, his favorite Belgian waffles with fresh berries and whipped cream. As we ate, I maintained pleasant conversation about inconsequential matters. If he noticed my occasional glances at the clock, he didn't mention it. At 8:30, he kissed me goodbye and left for work, completely unaware that by noon, his carefully constructed life would lie in ruins. It's time, I texted Turner once Richard's car had disappeared down our tree-lined street. From my home office, I made final confirmations. The divorce petition would be filed at 9 a.m. The packets for the IRS and SEC would be delivered at 10 a.m. The information would reach Richard's firm compliance department at 11 a.m. By noon, when Richard typically took his lunch break, often with clients, occasionally with Jennifer, the storm would have gathered full force. All that remained was for me to be in position to witness the deluge. At precisely 11:45 a.m., I walked through the revolving doors of Meridian Investments' gleaming downtown headquarters. I'd visited Richard's workplace perhaps a dozen times in 40 years, always as the supportive spouse at holiday parties or company events. Today, I arrived as the harbinger of his destruction. The security guard recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Woods. Here to surprise Mr. Woods for lunch." Something like that. I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Upstairs, the reception area of the Wealth Management Division hummed with the quiet efficiency of money in motion. I approached the receptionist, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. "I need to see my husband, Richard Woods." "It's urgent." She smiled professionally. "Let me see if he's available." "Your name?" "Caroline Woods." His wife of 40 years. Something in my tone made her glance up sharply before she lifted her phone. "Mr. Woods, your wife is here to see you. She says it's urgent." A pause. "Yes, sir." She replaced the receiver. "He'll be right out, Mrs. Woods." I took a seat in the waiting area, smoothing my charcoal pencil skirt, part of a new outfit I'd purchased specifically for today. The watch on my wrist, a Cartier I'd bought myself last week, my first significant indulgence in years, showed 11:52 a.m. Right on schedule. At 11:55, A commotion erupted down one of the hallways leading from the reception area. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the unmistakable sound of authority in motion. Through the glass partition, I watched as two men in suits entered what I knew to be Richard's corner office. The receptionist's phone lit up with multiple lines. She answered, her professional composure wavering as she listened. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." At 11:58, Richard emerged from the hallway, his face flushed with either anger or shock, perhaps both. When he spotted me in the waiting area, his expression shifted to confusion. "Caroline? What are you doing here? This isn't a good time." "I know exactly what time it is, Richard," I replied calmly, standing to face him. "In fact, I've orchestrated the timing quite carefully." Before he could respond, the two suited men appeared behind him. One I recognized as Arthur Pembroke, the firm's general counsel. "Richard, we need you back in the conference room now," Pembroke said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My wife is here," Richard protested. "Whatever this is about, it can wait." "No, it can't," Pembroke insisted. "And Mrs. Woods should join us. This concerns her as well." Richard's confusion deepened as he looked between us. "What are you talking about? Caroline, what's going on?" "Let's discuss it privately," I suggested, gesturing toward the conference room. In the elegant boardroom with its panoramic city views, Richard's world began to unravel. The second suited man introduced himself as the head of compliance. On the polished mahogany table lay an open copy of the dossier Turner had prepared, photographs of the Riverside condo, financial statements showing client fund manipulations, documentation of offshore accounts, and evidence of undisclosed conflicts of interest. "Would you care to explain this, Richard?" Pembroke asked, his tone glacial. Richard stared at the documents, his face draining of color. "Where did you get these?" "This is private." "Financial fraud isn't private," the compliance officer interrupted. "It's criminal, especially when it involves client funds." "There's been a misunderstanding," Richard insisted, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "I can explain everything." "Please do," I said quietly. "Start with the Riverside condo purchase through luxury living leases. Or perhaps the offshore accounts in Singapore. Or maybe explain the Louis Vuitton bag you bought Jennifer last month." Richard's head snapped toward me, shock replacing confusion. "How do you?" "No." I finished for him. "I know everything, Richard. Every account, every property, every woman, every dollar you've stolen from me and your clients for the past 19 years. His eyes darted around the room, the trapped animal seeking escape. "Caroline, whatever you think you know is documented in triplicate," I interrupted. "One copy here. One with the IRS and SEC, delivered an hour ago. And one with my divorce attorney, who filed the petition this morning." Richard collapsed into a chair, the full magnitude of his situation finally registering. You've been investigating me?" "For 8 months," I confirmed. "Ever since I found the receipt for Jennifer's handbag." "Mrs. Woods," Pembroke interjected, "I want to assure you that Meridian Investments had no knowledge of your husband's activities. We're as shocked as you must have been." "Not shocked," I corrected. "Disgusted. And determined to see justice done." Richard's face hardened as his initial shock gave way to anger. "You had no right to spy on me. Those accounts, those investments, I built those. I managed our finances while you played house." "Played house," I repeated, incredulity momentarily breaking through my calm facade. "I was a senior accountant for Westlake Corporation for 37 years. I earned nearly as much as you did. And you've been stealing $3,800 from me every month for decades." "I deserve that money," Richard snarled, his mask of respectability slipping entirely. "Do you have any idea how boring it is being married to you? How suffocating? Those other women gave me what you couldn't: youth, excitement, admiration. At my expense, I said, my voice steady despite the verbal assault. You funded your midlife crisis with my retirement security. The compliance officer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Woods, given the seriousness of these allegations and the documentation provided, Meridian Investments is placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. We'll need your company credentials, devices, and keys now. Richard stared at him, disbelief crossing his features. You can't be serious. I've brought millions in client assets to this firm. I'm a senior partner. You're a liability, Pembroke corrected, and potentially a criminal. We've already contacted the authorities. As if on cue, Richard's cell phone began ringing. He glanced at it, then back at me with dawning horror. What have you done? Exactly what you deserve, I replied calmly. The phone continued ringing as a security officer entered the conference room, clearly there to escort Richard from the premises. This isn't over, Richard hissed, standing to follow the security officer. You're right, I agreed. The IRS investigation is just beginning. So is the SEC inquiry. And then there's the divorce proceedings. As Richard was led away, his cell phone still ringing unanswered in his hand, I remained seated at the conference table. Pembroke and the compliance officer exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mrs. Woods, Pembroke finally said, I want to extend the firm's deepest apologies. Had we known? But you didn't. I finished for him. Your compliance protocols failed. Your oversight failed. And 17 of your clients have suffered financial harm as a result. His expression tightened. We'll make this right with the affected clients, of course. I'm sure you will, I replied, gathering my purse and standing. After all, the detailed evidence I've provided gives you little choice in the matter. As I walked out through the reception area, heads turned to follow my progress. Word traveled quickly in financial firms. Richard Woods, senior partner, escorted from the building. His wife somehow involved. Scandal in the making. Outside, I took my first deep breath of truly free air in decades. According to Turner's timeline, the IRS agents would be arriving at her home within the hour to execute a search warrant. The emergency asset freeze requested by my divorce attorney would be implemented by end of day. And Richard's carefully constructed house of cards would continue its spectacular collapse. I had no illusions that Richard would go quietly. Men like him never did. He would rage, threaten, possibly even plead. He would hire expensive attorneys and attempt to salvage what he could from the wreckage. But I had prepared for that too. The evidence was overwhelming, documented by professionals and delivered simultaneously to multiple authorities. There would be no time to hide assets, construct alibis, or manipulate the narrative. As I drove away from Meridian Investments for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from Turner. IRS on site at residence. SEC confirms receipt and priority status. Court granted emergency asset freeze. Justice, it seemed, moved swiftly when properly motivated. The week following execution day unfolded exactly as Turner had predicted. Richard's carefully constructed empire collapsed with breathtaking speed, each structural support failing in rapid succession. By Wednesday, his personal and business accounts had been frozen by court order. By Friday, Meridian Investments had formally terminated his employment and issued a press release distancing themselves from his alleged improprieties. The following Monday, the first regulatory complaint was filed publicly by the SEC, sending ripples through the financial community where Richard had once been respected. I watched it all from the sanctuary of Patricia's guest house, where I'd relocated the day of the confrontation. Richard had returned to our home to find IRS agents boxing documents and electronics, and a process server waiting with divorce papers. His first attempted contact came that evening, a voicemail message oscillating between rage and disbelief. How dare you? His voice hissed from my phone. 40 years, and this is how you repay me? You've destroyed everything. The next day, his tone shifted to threatening. You have no idea what you've done. My attorneys will bury you. You think you'll get a penny from me? I'll burn it all down first. By the third day, as the financial news tightened, his messages turned manipulative. Caroline, we need to talk. This has all gone too far. There are explanations for everything. We can work this out between us before it gets worse. I didn't respond to any of them, forwarding each message to both Turner and Simmons as evidence of his state of mind. When Richard showed up at Patricia's home, she refused him entry and called the police. The restraining order was granted the following day. He's spiraling, Turner observed during one of our update meetings. The financial reality is setting in. All accounts frozen, credit cards canceled, access to hidden funds blocked. And the mistress? I asked, curious despite myself. Jennifer? Vacated the Riverside condo 2 days ago. Took whatever she could carry and disappeared. The others, Alexis and Sophia, have both been contacted by investigators. They're cooperating to save themselves. The financial collapse was methodical and complete. The emergency court order had frozen not just our joint accounts but all accounts identified in Turner's investigation. Richard's attempt to access the Singapore funds was blocked by international banking regulations triggered by the IRS inquiry. His effort to liquidate investment holdings failed when brokerages received regulatory notices. Even the properties, the Riverside condo, the mountain cabin, the Florida beachfront, were secured with legal notices preventing sale or transfer. He's effectively insolvent, Simmons explained during a strategy meeting. On paper, there are millions in assets, but he can't access any of it pending investigation and court proceedings. Where is he staying? I asked, not out of concern but tactical awareness. A downtown hotel initially, Turner replied. But his credit cards have been canceled and his access to cash is severely limited. He's reportedly moved in with a former colleague temporarily. The professional consequences mounted alongside the financial ones. The SEC complaint became front-page news in financial circles. Former clients filed their own claims against both Richard and Meridian Investments. The state regulatory board suspended his financial advisor licenses, pending investigation. Richard's reputation, built over decades of careful image management, disintegrated in days. Former colleagues avoided association. Country club acquaintances suddenly found their schedules too full for golf. Even our daughter Sarah, initially shocked by the revelations, became firmly supportive of my actions once she understood the magnitude of her father's deception. How could he do this to you, Mom? She asked during one of her visits to Patricia's. All these years, making you believe everything was fine while he stole my future. I finished for her. And built himself a separate life with the proceeds. A month after execution day, the first health consequences emerged. Richard was hospitalized briefly with what was initially reported as a heart attack, but turned out to be severe stress-induced hypertension. The doctors prescribed medication, rest, and stress reduction, an impossibility given his circumstances. I felt no satisfaction at the news of his health crisis, merely the dispassionate observation that actions have consequences. The Richard Woods who had arrogantly dismissed my financial concerns for decades was experiencing the natural outcome of his choices. By the 3-month mark, the legal proceedings were fully underway. The divorce case had uncovered even more financial malfeasance. The IRS investigation had expanded to include tax years beyond what Turner had initially documented. The SEC had filed additional complaints based on new evidence from cooperating witnesses at Meridian. Richard's legal expenses mounted as he hired specialists in divorce law, tax defense, and securities regulation. With his assets frozen and income terminated, these expenses accumulated as debt, further compromising his financial position. His attorneys attempted various legal maneuvers, challenging the asset freeze, claiming violations of privacy, even suggesting that I had been complicit in the financial arrangements. Each attempt failed in the face of the overwhelming documentation Turner had assembled. "He's running out of options," Simmons informed me after a particularly contentious court hearing. "His attorneys have suggested settlement talks." "On what terms?" I asked, already knowing my answer would be negative. "They're proposing a division of assets that would leave him with roughly 40% of the documented holdings." I laughed, an actual, genuine laugh of disbelief. "After stealing from me for 19 years? After hiding millions? No. Not a penny more than the law absolutely requires me to leave him." 6 months after execution day, I attended a deposition where Richard would be questioned under oath about the financial structures he'd created. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since the confrontation at Meridian Investments. The physical change shocked me. The man who entered the conference room bore little resemblance to the confident, polished financial advisor who had left our home that fateful morning. Richard had aged years and months. His face was gaunt, with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. His once immaculate appearance was now merely adequate. The suit a bit loose, the shirt collar slightly frayed, the signature gold cufflinks replaced by plain buttons. When he saw me, he faltered momentarily before his attorney guided him to a seat. Throughout the 7-hour deposition, he avoided meeting my gaze directly, his voice growing hoarser as he was forced to acknowledge, under oath, the systematic deception he had perpetrated. "Did you establish the Cayman Islands account ending in 4732 for the purpose of concealing assets from your wife?" the attorney asked. "I established that account for investment purposes," Richard hedged. "Did Mrs. Woods have knowledge of this account?" A pause. "No." "Did you use funds from your joint marital accounts to fund this offshore account?" Another, longer pause. "Yes." Question after question, admission after admission. By late afternoon, Richard's confident facade had crumbled entirely. When the deposition concluded, he remained seated as others began gathering their materials. Finally, when nearly everyone had left, he spoke directly to me for the first time. "Was it worth it, Caroline?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Destroying everything we built?" "Everything I built." I considered him for a long moment before responding. "You didn't build anything, Richard. You stole." "From me." "From your clients. From the government. You're not facing consequences because of what I did. You're facing consequences because of what you did repeatedly for decades." He shook his head slowly. "You have no idea what pressures I was under. The lifestyle you wanted." "Stop," I interrupted. "The lifestyle I wanted? I drove the same car for 12 years. I bought clothes on sale. I clipped coupons while you spent thousands on other women." For a moment, something like shame flickered across his features. Then his attorney returned, ending our exchange with a curt, "That's enough, Richard." As I left the deposition, I realized that Richard would never truly acknowledge the magnitude of his betrayal. In his mind, he would remain the victim of my investigation, of overzealous regulators, of a legal system that failed to recognize his financial brilliance. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, finally accepting that Richard's recognition or remorse was unnecessary for my vindication. The systematic dismantling of his life, financial, professional, social, was proceeding with the mathematical certainty of compound interest. Justice, it turned out, could indeed be balanced on a ledger. 1 year after execution day, I sat in the office of Judge Eleanor Simmons, no longer my attorney but now presiding over family court cases, reminiscing about the journey we'd shared. "Did you ever imagine it would unfold exactly as we planned?" she asked, leaning back in her judicial chair. "Not exactly," I admitted. "I expected more resistance, more evasion. I didn't anticipate how quickly it would all collapse once exposed to light." The final divorce decree had been issued 3 months earlier, awarding me 92% of the marital assets, an unusually high percentage that reflected the court's recognition of Richard's systematic financial misconduct. The tax settlement with the IRS had been finalized, with Richard solely responsible for back taxes, penalties, and interest exceeding $1.3 million. The SEC case had concluded with a lifetime ban from the securities industry and additional financial penalties. The Riverside condo had been sold, along with the mountain cabin and Florida beachfront property. The proceeds, after satisfying tax obligations, had been added to my settlement. The offshore accounts had been repatriated through complicated legal mechanisms, their contents divided according to the divorce judgment. In total, I had recovered approximately $3.6 million, far more than the original $1.7 million Richard had diverted from our household funds over 19 years, but still less than it would have grown to had it been properly invested for retirement as intended. "And your new home?" Simmons inquired. "Are you settled?" "Completely," I confirmed. "It's perfect for this chapter of life. Single level, reasonable size, excellent security. Sarah and the grandchildren visit often." After the dust had settled, I'd purchased a comfortable townhouse in a planned community with amenities appropriate for active seniors. No ostentación, no excessive luxury. Just security, comfort, and proximity to family and friends. "And Richard?" Simmons asked delicately. "Have you heard?" "Patricia ran into him last month," I replied, my tone neutral. "He's living in an apartment on the north side, working as a financial consultant for a small business, apparently, since he can't be licensed as an advisor anymore." What I didn't share was Patricia's description of Richard's appearance: gaunt, aged, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying to conserve energy. The stress-induced hypertension had developed into more serious cardiac issues, requiring ongoing medication and monitoring. "Do you ever regret the thoroughness of your approach?" Simmons asked, professional curiosity in her voice. "Many in your position might have simply divorced him and moved on." I considered the question carefully before answering. He stole nearly $2 million from me over 2 decades. He betrayed every aspect of our marriage. He compromised my financial security, my trust, and my dignity. And he would have continued indefinitely had I not stopped him. "That doesn't quite answer the question," Simmons observed with the directness that had made her an effective attorney and now a respected judge. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. Not the thoroughness, not the timing, not the outcomes. What I regret is the 40 years I spent trusting someone who never deserved it." After leaving Simmons' office, I drove to the small cafe where I now met weekly with a group of women who had become unexpected friends, all survivors of financial abuse in marriage, all rebuilding their lives with newfound wisdom and caution. Our conversations ranged from investment strategies to emotional healing, each of us bringing different perspectives to shared experiences. As I parked my car, a practical new SUV purchased with cash from my settlement, I spotted a familiar figure shuffling along the sidewalk across the street. Richard, gray and diminished, leaning slightly on a cane as he made his way toward a pharmacy entrance. For a moment, I simply observed him, this stranger I had lived with for 4 decades. The confident stride was gone, replaced by the careful gait of someone navigating both physical and psychological damage. The designer overcoat had been replaced by a serviceable department store version. The gold watch was absent from his wrist. He glanced up, perhaps sensing observation, and our eyes met across the distance. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by a complex emotion I couldn't quite identify: shame, perhaps, or regret, or simply the dull acknowledgement of irreversible loss. I didn't wave or nod or offer any gesture of recognition. After a moment, he looked away and continued his slow progress toward the pharmacy door. Inside the cafe, my friends greeted me warmly, sharing updates on their lives and financial journeys. As I settled into my chair, accepting the cup of tea Patricia had already ordered for me, I felt the final weight of Richard Wood's lift from my shoulders. "You look lighter today," observed Janet, a retired nurse whose husband had hidden gambling debts for 30 years. "I feel lighter," I agreed. "I think I've finally closed a chapter that needed ending." Later, as we discussed investment options for Janet's recent settlement, I shared the knowledge I'd gained through both my professional career and personal experience. The key is understanding exactly where your money goes. Never delegate your financial security entirely to anyone, not advisors, not family, not spouses. "Wisdom earned the hard way," Patricia commented. "The most valuable kind," I replied, raising my teacup in a toast that celebrated not just survival but vindication. That evening, as I reviewed my monthly investment statements, a ritual I now performed with meticulous attention, I reflected on the journey from betrayal to justice. The forensic accounting that had begun as an investigation into infidelity had revealed a financial predator hiding behind the facade of a devoted husband. The carefully orchestrated exposure had collapsed a decades-long fraud in a matter of days. And I, Caroline Woods, at 66, had emerged not just financially intact but empowered by the experience. The woman who had trusted blindly for 40 years now managed her own investments, made her own decisions, and built a community of supportive friends who valued her wisdom and resilience. The final statement from my attorney had arrived that morning. All cases closed, all matters resolved. The manila folder now sat in my fireproof safe alongside the documentation of my new financial reality, accounts in my name alone, investments selected with care, a will that protected my daughter's inheritance, and a living trust that ensured my own security. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Sarah. "Love you, Mom. So proud of your strength. Dinner Sunday?" I smiled as I typed my reply, looking forward to it, bringing that chocolate cake the kids love. In the quiet of my new home, surrounded by possessions I had chosen and paid for myself, I felt the satisfaction of equations balanced, of justice served, of a future reclaimed from the hands of a thief. Richard Woods had stolen nearly $2 million and countless moments of trust from our marriage. But in the end, I had reclaimed something far more valuable: my independence, my dignity, and the remaining years of my life. The ledger was finally, irrevocably balanced. If you enjoyed this story of financial justice and methodical revenge, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more gripping tales of vindication and empowerment. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads of compelling revenge stories.